and a proud parent of a member of the class of 2023. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar with Neil Levesque, Executive Director of the New Hampshire Institute of Politics. This webinar is timely, and it's the first of a two-part series. Today, Neil will review the September poll results and the most recent presidential and vice presidential debate. We hope you will join us on November 5th for a post-election follow-up webinar. We'll certainly be sending out a reminder about that webinar. As you know, we are committed to keeping our alumni and friends engaged with St. Anselm by partnering with our centers, institutes, other departments on campus, and our alumni. We will continue to offer webinars, podcasts, and other opportunities to stay connected. Personally, I think that the variety of programs offered these last 7 months by our faculty, staff, and center directors has been extremely impressive. Thank you to Neil and many other people at the college who have offered their expertise or suggested a topic. I would encourage you to contact the Alumni Relations Office if you have suggestions for future programs. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the college's website for those who couldn't make it live today. Neil will speak for about 25 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions. There is a Q&A button on your screen. Please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A button. And again, we'll ask you to use the Q&A button and not the chat button. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Neil Levesque. Neil has long held leadership roles in politics and governance across New Hampshire, currently serving as the Executive Director at the nationally known New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College. Neil joined the Institute as its Executive Director in July of 2009 and has since hosted a variety of state and national productions, including 5 presidential debates and numerous distinguished speakers, such as Mitt Romney and others. In his rare spare time, and I mean rare spare time, Neil is an accomplished sportsman, as evidenced by this photo from this weekend, actually. So Neil, maybe later on we'll ask you a question about your adventure with this, I think, 300-pound tuna off of Rye Harbor. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College, Mr. Neil Levesque.
Well, thank you, Jim. I was really surprised by that picture. Jim and I are friends on Facebook, so maybe I'll have to unfriend him now so that he doesn't put these pictures of me. A lot of the times I do interviews, and particularly radio shows, people find out that I'm a tuna fisherman, and I usually get more questions about catching tuna than I do about politics. So that's kind of funny. So yes, that's one of the fish we've caught. My brother is a dentist. He's the other guy in the picture. And sometimes we fought those fish for up to 6 hours. And my brother, the next day at work, can't raise his hands to go into people's mouths because his arms are so tired. So that's kind of a funny aside. Let me just start out by saying that Jim Flanagan is very self-effacing. And most people know Jim, and he's been putting on these great alumni, really great Zoom connections during this COVID period. But not only does he always be looking for more resources to help the students here at St. Anselm and build this campus up, but Jim is actually involved with most of the major aspects of the college as we react to the pandemic, and he has been the leader on campus as we have worked through many of these real challenges. This is unprecedented. What do you do if there's an outbreak in a dormitory? So Jim has been instrumental in all of that discussion. He has worked tirelessly. No joke, Jim volunteers on the weekends to make sure that there's somebody walking around to make sure students aren't partying a little too much or keeping their masks on late into the evening. Now that's a job for only a few rare people. So thank you, Jim. Hey, look it. We have 27 days left in this election. And if you could think that if a pandemic, Supreme Court nomination, the president getting a deadly virus is not enough, we have 27 days left. Who knows next week, if you move forward a week and you watch this, you may say, but they didn't mention this huge thing that happened. So there's a lot of things going on. And this pandemic, if anything else, has made us more civically engaged probably than any other time period in America. That puts the Institute of Politics here at St. Anselm College front and center. We're doing a lot of activities. We're just doing them by Zoom. And that includes doing the debates here with our partner, WMUR-TV, as we go towards the gubernatorial election and the U.S. Senate race and both House races here in New Hampshire. So those are all being broadcast, again, from this institute. And we are working with our student ambassadors. Many of you probably on this program were a student ambassador, so you might remember those times. Well, we're working closely with them and trying to reach out to particularly the freshmen so that they don't feel isolated and they feel a part of this, even though we have to live through this. So guess what? We had a nice debate last night, didn't we? I think, people say, well, who do you think won? And I think that certain people had better answers for certain questions and certain things that they projected. But let me just say this. I think the American people won. I think we saw two candidates who sparred. A lot of it were about issues such as the pandemic, but they were generally gracious towards each other. There was tough, but it didn't get into the slugfest that we saw just a week or 10 days earlier, which I think was a complete disaster for a civic event with all of the people in this country tuning in and all of the things on the line. What we saw in that first presidential debate was terrible. So last night, yes, many different things happened. I was going to try to find a fly to stick on my head today just as a joke, but I didn't want to give Jim a heart attack. Of all the strange things I've seen, someone as serious as Mike Pence answering a question with a fly on his gray hair was part of that. But let's get to some of the things that we're learning about today about that debate. And one thing is that I think a lot of Republicans who might have watched that first presidential debate, then watched the vice presidential debate, might say, hey, I wish that this guy was on the top of the ticket, because Mike Pence did do very well. He showed a lot of empathy. His timing as far as his delivery was very, very good. Just the entire way that he answered the question, I thought was, he didn't skip a beat, and he did what he needed to do. You don't want to be failing at this point and being a part of the Trump ticket. Secondly, Harris, a little bit different. There's a couple different things going on. Some of the times where she was answering a question or Pence was answering a question, she might have seemed a little bit arrogant in her answer. But what did she have to do? She had to show people that she's a capable, serious person ready for the job if need be. And I think she accomplished that. I think she showed that she's not just, some lightweight, that she knew what she was talking about, and she could take on a sitting vice president fairly well. So I think she accomplished that goal. Both of those people, nobody's really voting for a vice presidential pick, but what it does is if a vice presidential pick fails miserably, Sarah Palin and Dan Quayle are two examples, great people, by the way, but didn't really pan out as far as being really good candidates. And if they fail miserably, it shows that maybe the presidential candidate has a tough time making decisions. So I think that it's a pivot point, but it's not as major as we saw 10 days prior to that. Today we have some breaking news, and that is the second debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, scheduled for October 15th. Yes, within that window of COVID. The Presidential Debate Commission decided that they would go virtual and they would do these things via Zoom, essentially. That's actually what we do with Channel 9 here. what we decided was you can't just put a Zoom into somebody's basement, because frankly, in politics, a lot of times there'll be some young person holding up a sign saying, giving some cheat answer. And so what we did here was we had somebody who kind of set it up, watched what was going on, and provided some sort of policing. By the way, that was me. I suffered through COVID-19, so I was the guinea pig for those debates. So today the president announced that he is not going to participate if it's virtual, and sort of went on offense as far as that goes. Now, he may also, in the back of his mind, realize that although he thought he did well in the debate, and maybe people told him that, we didn't necessarily see his numbers decline in our recent polling. But what we are seeing is that those few people who are undecided are breaking Biden's way. So he's getting a little momentum. So again, Trump's numbers have remained, and those few people have gone Biden's direction. This is post-debate period. And if you look nationally on some of the polls in some of the states like Florida, Arizona, you'll see too that it's the same thing, where you'll see that Trump basically holds his own, but those few undecideds possibly that watched that debate or at least heard about the fallout from the debate are breaking Biden's way. Who knows if we will have a final debate before this election? That would certainly be a major pivot point that may change people's minds. We also have another major pivot point where the hearings for Judge Barrett to start taking place next week. And we're going to start to see a lot of sort of attacks on her and some pushback. She is a Catholic mother, and she kind of comes out of central casting. She's a difficult opponent to try to attack, particularly during a presidential election. Catholics, although they don't vote in one big block, this election and many elections before that will get decided by Catholic voters. A lot of these folks who live in Wisconsin, who live in states like Pennsylvania, it's more of a suburban Catholic voter that really is making up their minds. And so the Biden campaign's got to be very careful about labeling her or pushing her too much into a corner. As of right now, their main attack on her has been that she'll eliminate Obamacare, self-described by Obama as Obamacare. But they haven't really taken the gloves off. Maybe they will do that next week. What we're also seeing is that the momentum is sort of going in the Democrats' direction. They certainly have a money advantage. They raised a lot of money when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. And we're seeing in states where really tight Senate races where maybe they shouldn't be. Arizona, for example, where Biden is up by 3, and there's now the chance that Democrats will pick up that seat in the U.S. Senate. South Carolina, home of Lindsey Graham. It's either very close or Lindsey Graham is only up by 1 point. So another really close U.S. Senate race. Maine, pretty consistent that Susan Collins has been down by a few points. So we're seeing that if you were to look at the data right now, the polling data, Biden has an advantage, but not only that, that the Democrats could pick up the U.S. Senate at this point. So it could be a very dramatic swing, nothing that we haven't seen in the past. If one party controls the government, a lot of the times there'll be a swing back. And we've seen this many times, particularly recently with the Tea Party election. So what's it really going to depend on here? In our own polling, which I'll get into in New Hampshire, we saw that Trump only has in the 80% support amongst people in his own party versus almost all Democrats, just about everybody, are completely unified behind Joe Biden. So what Trump needs to do is basically try to shore up that base even more, and that those people need to get to the polls. You know, if you have a bad debate and your team is sort of demoralized, you don't see people wearing the team jersey, if you will, the next day, going to work, if you will. And so the same thing can be said for politics, where if you feel like your team isn't doing real well or your candidate's not doing real well, the motivation for you to go out and vote sinks. That may change with this Supreme Court nomination fight next week. So let me just get in really quickly to our polling. Now, these are New Hampshire voters, and so you may say, well, what difference does New Hampshire make? Well, we don't just have the primary here. We also have 4 electoral votes, which really is a fought over 4 electoral votes. If Al Gore had won our 4 electoral votes, he would have become president. We would never have had the Florida recount. So they are important. We have a purple state. We have a Republican governor and 4 members of our delegation who are all Democrats. So it's a pretty split state. And what we're seeing right now, so our polling is 1,150 voters that we sampled, a fairly large sample size with a margin of error of 2.9%. What we're seeing is that Sununu holds a sizable, he's the Republican governor, holds a sizable lead with about 58%. And when I say with about, what I'm rounding, it's 57.7 for you statisticians, versus the Democratic opponent, Feltus, with 35.5. So here you see a Republican governor who has been through the COVID situation and the leadership with it, with a commanding lead over his Democratic opponent. Why is that important? Well, flip to Donald Trump, who is of the same party as Sununu, and he's only garnering 41.3%. So that's about your sort of baseline Republican number here in New Hampshire, to Biden's 52.6%. So what does that mean? So through our polling, we've done about 5 polls since last winter. Biden has almost consistently had an 8-point lead, and Trump is as flat as Lake Winnipesaukee frozen over, just completely flat. Okay, so what we've seen is after this debate in New Hampshire, we go from 8 to 12-point lead for Biden. So a few of those undecideds all of a sudden switch to Biden, and that is New Hampshire. But what could also be the case is that New Hampshire is really a good testing site for what's going on in the minds of many voters across the country. That's why we like to test New Hampshire. The U.S. Senate race here, we have Democrat Jeanne Shaheen, 53% to her opponent, Republican opponent, Messner with 38%. Custer, a congresswoman from the 2nd district, which is a little more Democratic than the 1st congressional district, with about 52% to her Republican challenger, Steve Negron, at 38%. But we have a closing of the gap in the 1st congressional district. So for you who, former students, that includes Manchester and the Seacoast. That's more of a Republican leaning district. There are more Republicans in that district than there are in the 2nd congressional district. Democrat holds that, it's Chris Pappas. When you were a student, if you ever ordered the Puritan backroom chicken tenders, he owns that restaurant. He's at about 49% to Mowers, the opponent, who's at 41%. Mowers and Trump have an almost exactly the same number. But Pappas hasn't shored up some of those undecideds as much as he could have. So what we're seeing is that, as I mentioned, Trump has some problems within his own party. If he was getting 100% of Republicans, he'd be either neck and neck or probably edging out Biden at this point. But he has that problem here in New Hampshire. Biden's image has improved since August, which might be the case that we haven't seen because of the pandemic. You sort of see these clips on television or stage news conference, but Biden seems to be getting out a lot more. He's doing a lot more television town halls with things like CNN, ABC, MSNBC, and of course, this debate. And so when he's been seen in public, and his capabilities are being shown, people are starting to like that, and his numbers are going up. That being said, again, there's 27 days left in this election. We have plenty of time for a major problem to come forth. I think we've probably seen it all at this point, but things can change. And so this snapshot is just something that's taking place right now. I will say this, that because of the amount of mail-in balloting right now and absentee voting, that used to be that in politics, we used to say we sell widgets, just like for those of you who are in business, you sell widgets and you're constantly selling the widget. In politics, we used to say that we sell widgets, but there's only one sales date, and that's election day. And so right now, that day has sort of moved around because people are filling these things out today, tomorrow, the next day, and they're making that decision and mailing them in, and the election for them is basically over. So it's a much more fluid situation. So things can change in this 27 days, but it's better to have a lead. So advantage right now is certainly Joe Biden and the Democrats. Before I go to questions, I'm gonna take the question that I always get. The polls predicted that Hillary Clinton would win 4 years ago, and Donald Trump surprised everybody. How do you have trust anymore in polling? So I'll tell you how that happened and why there's been things to correct that. So 4 years ago, I have a brother-in-law named Bob. Bob is a blue-collar worker living in New Hampshire. He is a registered voter, but he rarely ever votes. He's angry at politics and doesn't really like it. So 4 years ago, he keeps hearing about Donald Trump, and he likes Donald Trump's sort of stick it to him, we're going to stand up, I'm going to fight for you message. We're going to make America great again. And my brother-in-law, Bob, says, you know what, I'm going to go vote for him. So he votes for him. The problem with Bob is that Bob doesn't have a voting record going back. So when pollsters go and they try to find people to ask if they're going to vote, naturally, you wouldn't pick Bob, who normally doesn't vote. You would try to find Jim Flanagan, who votes in every single election, because Jim Flanagan has shown through his own record that he is a reliable voter. And so you're trying to test the Jim Flanagan, not Bob, my brother-in-law. But Bob, my brother-in-law, turned out in great force, and there was just about enough to turn the tide for the electoral win that Donald Trump experienced. Hillary Clinton still won the popular vote. And so there's, the fact is she did win that popular vote, but that's not how the game is played. That's not how the rules are. And so Donald Trump did win the Electoral College. The thing about this election is, for us being in the polling business, we now know where Bob is. We know who he is, and we're going to ask him the question. He can't hide, and we're going to try to find him because now he does have a track record of voting. So those people are not going to be falling through the cracks like they were before. In the COVID world that we're in, we used to do it where we would have St. Anselm students booked in 3-hour schedules. We would pay them. It's a fancy phone system that automatically dials people, cell phones and landlines. And we would go through this process. We'd get about a sample size of about 500 or 600 people. And now we don't do it that way. We do a text message. We actually have to push a button physically push a button about 30,000 times because the Federal Election Commission and the FCC only allow you to communicate via text if you're actually physically touching the button. I know it sounds ridiculous, but we do that. We have somebody assigned to doing that. Those text messages go out and then the respondents reply. It's the same thing actually that campaigns are doing. You might get, let's say that you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. If you're a Republican, you might get a text message from Donald Trump or the campaign manager that says, don't forget to get your absentee ballot, this kind of thing. That's the same sort of program that's used that we do with polling, but our sample sizes are actually much bigger now because we can get a lot bigger response. So that being said, I'm happy to take a couple questions. I don't have all the answers. As you might have guessed, I throw some negative things towards both sides of the aisles. I try to be positive if I can. If you don't like that it was something that I said about a candidate that you support, I'm just trying to use the data to make an interpretation today for our presentation.
Right. Neil, that was fantastic. And as always, thanks for your insight on all things politics. I want to remind everyone, if you'd like to ask me questions, just use the Q&A function on your screen. Neil, I'll start one off. You want to talk a little bit about, again, in the COVID world, obviously it's a challenge. You don't see the students as face to face as much as you do, although you may want to talk about the fact you're zooming from from the Institute of Politics right now. But if you want to talk a little bit about what's the mood of the students this year, and obviously it's a different, some turnover, but compared to 4 years ago. And I won't ask the faculty question. What's the mood of the students?
Well, certainly I find in my interaction that they're down about it. They're not getting exactly the same experience, but they, generally I find students are pretty optimistic people. They haven't been sort of tampered with by all the great disappointments that we've all experienced in life, and they see the future as bright. And so they see actually that they're enthusiastic about the election. They're very engaged. A lot of them are very engaged with some of the social justice aspects that we saw, particularly during the summer. They were really passionate about that. We find that they're very interested in the election. They're still volunteering at this rate, and they've been very active about trying to get fellow students and fellow citizens out to vote. We have more interest in how you vote in New Hampshire than we ever have. We have a program actually on that tomorrow. I guess tomorrow's Friday, so tomorrow, in which we have the Deputy Secretary of State outlining how you go about voting in New Hampshire. A student who puts their head down on a pillow in Goffstown, New Hampshire, at St. Anselm College has every right to vote in this state. But upon doing so, they basically need to acknowledge the fact that now they are claiming that their citizenship is New Hampshire, and therefore there are certain laws and responsibilities that go along with that same. I think it's a great gift to be a New Hampshire resident. So basically, I'll boil it down to: if you believe that you are a resident of New Hampshire and you're going to vote in Goffstown, New Hampshire, then just like any other resident of Goffstown, New Hampshire, if you own a Honda Accord, you need to register that Honda Accord in Goffstown. You need to pay the property tax on that car just like you would and any other citizen does in Goffstown, New Hampshire. So there are some things that students need to be aware of, and we are going through that with them on Friday. Overall, though, the students are the best part of my job. I just love individually working with them. I spend the vast majority, I would say probably of my job is doing that. It's hard to keep a record of it, but they're full of life, and they're optimistic about the future.
That's great, Neil. Thanks. That's a great segue to our first question. Alumnus and someone who spent a lot of time down at the Institute of Politics, Neil, Ashling, actually, Stanek. Her question is, do you think, and hello, Ashling, given Trump's stance on the virus, his voter base is less fearful to go to the polls versus Biden's base, who may feel like they have a strong chance of winning and therefore do not want to risk going out and voting?
Well, first of all, one of my favorite students of all time, Ashling Stanek, great to hear from you, even if it's through a Q&A function on Zoom. But and a great question. So what we're seeing in New Hampshire is we've had record numbers of people take absentee ballots during the primary. So we had a primary here in September. We had record numbers of Democrats take that absentee ballot. And we had just the same amount of people in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party vote in the primary, but the Democrats took much, much higher rates of absentee ballots. So, like most things in this country, the virus, it really has sort of separated us again along sort of these philosophical or tribal lines that we've never really seen. How you watch somebody on television and what your reaction to it is, what you see when you see somebody wearing a mask, your reaction to, say, Dr. Fauci and his advice about the pandemic. A lot of the times your opinions are formed by this sort of tribe that you're in. And the tribe is Democrat or Republican, and what the head of the tribe is saying. So I think there is no doubt that people who are Republicans are less fearful, if you will, of going out in public and potentially voting than Democrats, and we've seen that. Great question.
Great. The next question is from an alum who graduated long before the Institute of Politics existed, and the individual said, "Thank you, Neil. This has been very informative, and the poll results in New Hampshire are quite interesting. With 27 days left, do you think COVID will be the dominant issue for the remainder of the campaign, or can the SCOTUS hearings and or another issue overtake it? And of course, who knows about an October surprise?"
Right. I mean, if there's one thing I would be waiting for, it's some kind of October surprise, like, hey, we have a vaccine. How does that change the psyche of the voter going into the polls? I think, and I've said this since March, that the pandemic is the number one issue facing voters, and the person's leadership, excuse me, person's leadership that they've displayed through this period of time. But certainly there's been other things. And, you know, the president getting COVID, then all of the clips showing him, you know, at these events where his supporters were not wearing masks, his own family at the debate refusing to take masks, and then all of a sudden him getting this and having this outbreak. How many people say, so look, you know, he could have prevented this in his own house, and he didn't. And it just goes to show that he's downplayed it. You know, what are the Bob Woodward tapes? What influence do they have? They were brought up a lot last night in that debate. So I think definitely the pandemic. But if you are voting on the pandemic and the leadership style, maybe you already have a feeling of where you're going to go. So if the polls are tight and you already know that, what influence is the handling of Justice Barrett going to play out next week? I think that's a big pivot. And again, that final debate is another one of these big pivot points, if it happens.
Thanks, Neil. Speaking of debates, someone asked the question, which candidate do you think will be more impacted if we do not have any additional debates?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. Biden had to prove that and dispel this idea that he wasn't ready for prime time and that he had lost his fastball. I think that Trump interrupting so much in that first debate actually prevented us from seeing Biden sort of, you know, either fail at that or succeed at it. And I think that if he has the lead and people have already seen these two candidates debate and they don't necessarily like the whole debate, and particularly maybe the president's interrupting, things like that, that the advantage would be for Biden to not debate. I was surprised by today's tweet, or I guess he was on Fox News. He called into Fox News and said, I'm not going to debate. I was surprised because I think that when you're down in the polls and there's a debate, you should take advantage of it. You know, historically speaking, Jimmy Carter and his whole team thought, hey, we should debate Ronald Reagan every place we possibly can. You know, Ronald Reagan in their minds was not intelligent like Jimmy Carter, and he would Jimmy Carter was going to run circles around Reagan, who was, not as smart as him. And of course, that turned out to not be true. And it was a good play. There was a lot of debate within Reagan's own circle as to whether or not he should debate Carter. It was actually former Secretary of State James Baker, who was helping Reagan's campaign at the time, who convinced Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan that they should be debating. And of course, the end result was that was a real turning point in the victor in 1980.
Right. The next question comes from a 1969 grad on the Canadian border, actually, in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire. And he writes, if you could just give your thoughts on the stimulus package and chances of something being passed before the election. I know the market reacted pretty positively yesterday on rumors that something, at least a piecemeal package parts of it would be passed. So your thoughts on that now?
So that's a great question. I think that McConnell is much less enthusiastic about trying to get something passed because they're really worried about the debt to GDP ratio at this point. And I think that the economy right now seems to have recovered, at least to some degree, and it's fairly strong. There's a lot of money though in the system. And I think that Republicans are they're saying that they're coming to the table. They want to have a deal, yada, yada, yada. But do they really? I'm not sure that they actually do. Trump's reaction the other day was saying that he wasn't going to deal with the stimulus until after the election. And then he kind of backtracked on that. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the stock market went up because it said, well, that, we're hearing rumors that there's going to be a deal. I do not believe there will be a deal. I think that next week, all eyes will be on the Supreme Court. And I think it's going to be, if you think that the world has been divided and the country has been divided, it's going to be much, much worse and on full display next week.
Great. Thanks, Neil. Speaking of the Supreme Court, someone asked the question, well, Senator Harris, I think wisely didn't answer this question last night, as well as Vice President Pence didn't answer a number of questions either. But this person writes, do you think the Democrats intend to increase the numbers on the Supreme Court? And the person says Biden hasn't answered that question yet. Will he?
They both really didn't answer it, did they? And Pence really seized on that. I think it was probably a pretty good winning moment for him. And a lot of right-wing, I don't want to say right-wing, but right-leaning news organizations are really showing why that would be dangerous. Do I think they will? Yes. The fact is that it's who's got the votes. And if the Democrats win the White House and they win the Senate and they hold on to the House and they've got everything and they've got the votes, why wouldn't they do that? They don't want a conservative court. And so why wouldn't they push to try to stack the court? FDR, this is not new. FDR was involved with a similar attempt. And so why wouldn't they do it? And I think that if you have the votes, why not? It's the same thing. It was why, Merrick Garland, why the same Republicans who said we can't vote on this Merrick Garland thing before the election. Well, now they're saying we have to vote on this court pick. That's because they got the votes. And so, yes, some of them seem like hypocrites, but, politics is getting to 51 and when you have the power to do things, you're going to try to do that because you believe that doing that is in the best interest of your country. So a lot of people misconstrue the fact that they're doing this because they're trying to hurt the other side, but they believe, let's say the right now, believes that putting a conservative on the court right now, if you have the votes, get it done, is to the advantage of our country. It's for our long-term interests. So of course they're going to try to do it.
Right. Someone writes, it seems that Matt Mowers is benefiting from being labeled a Trump guy, while Corky Messner seems to be hurt from being linked to Trump. What are your thoughts there?
So here's an interesting thing that Trump did in New Hampshire is we had some pretty spirited primaries, and Trump came in early on and said, these are the two people I'm endorsing. In a primary, to have the president of the United States do that was rather unprecedented. And so he backed these two candidates, one for the U.S. Senate, one for the U.S. House, Mowers and Mesner. They're two different races. Senator Shaheen was the first elected woman governor in New Hampshire. She has a long time on the ballots here in New Hampshire. She's very well known. She runs a very good campaign. She ran Jimmy Carter's campaign in 1976 here in New Hampshire, actually. She was 26 years old. She goes back a ways. Messner is being portrayed as sort of an out-of-stater who doesn't have long roots in New Hampshire. He's a challenger in a pandemic, much, much harder. I mean, imagine you say, you know what, I'm going to put my name on a ballot and I'm going to run for office. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go door to door. I'm going to give speeches to my supporters and to new people. I'm going to try to get new people. I'm going to go, to different events and shake hands and, kiss babies and do all those things that candidates do. All those things you can't do right now. So it's very, very hard to conduct a campaign as a challenger. Matt Mowers has a tighter, has tightened up the numbers in that district, but that first congressional district has a lot more registered Republicans than, say, the other district, the second congressional district. I think he's also running a pretty good campaign. They're both young, talented, smart candidates, so it's actually been kind of fun to watch them, and they've been battling it out, and they're both doing well. Mowers has tightened it up, but it's a hard 8 points that he's got to overcome in order to win the election.
Great. I think we have time, if it's okay with you, Neil, for a couple more questions. Stephen Monier writes in, he said, can you talk about a little more about the impact of the VP debate? It usually doesn't have an impact, but given the ages of the two presidential candidates, is it more important this year? And then I guess I'll add in if another presidential debate doesn't happen, is there a chance that maybe they do one more vice presidential debate? So.
I haven't gotten that question, Jim. That's pretty good. And Steve Monier, one of my favorite people, thanks for asking that question. I do think that the vice presidential debate took on more of an importance, but I think that both proved what they needed to prove last night. So they both showed that they're capable of doing the job. They're smart. They're articulate, and they're not, going to fall on their feet. You're right. These two candidates, they would be the oldest president to ever serve. If you think about when Reagan ran, he was 68 years old in 1980, and that was a big, oh my goodness, he's too old to be president. And now we have, 77 and 74. So these are aged candidates. My mother had a good statement for that, which is, by the way, she said, I won't vote for, she's 79. She said, I can't vote for anybody over 70. She goes, there's just a big difference between 70 and 75. And she doesn't have much choice at this point, so she's got to vote one way or the other. But I think it just goes to show that, people are looking at this in the future. One thing I was looking at was both of these people are probably going to be in New Hampshire in the future. They've spent a lot of time here, not only in this building, but in New Hampshire in the past. And I expect that these are two names that I think are going to be in American politics for quite some time. So depending upon who wins and who loses in November, I think you're going to see these folks back here and rather quickly.
Great. Next question is from Chris Toomey, class of 1990, who is a political science major, graduate. His question is, in the 2016 presidential election, suburban women played a big role in Trump's victory, particularly in his current state of residence, Pennsylvania. How do you see that demographic voting in, would you say 27 short days now?
27. So those sort of suburban Catholic men and women are going to be crucial in states like Pennsylvania. And I think Pennsylvania is very important. It's not as important, I think, as Florida. I think Florida is the state where if you can turn on TV on election night and see that one candidate has won Florida or the other, it's a pretty good indication that that person's going to become president or already is president. But you're right. I think it's crucial that Trump do some things to shore up that base and get that 80-something% Republican leaning voter into his camp. And it's troubling that he doesn't have them all. Sometimes having a softer image will do that, not being so aggressive as he was in the first debate. But that's not who he is. He's not that way. And a lot of people say, let Trump be Trump. And he's got a winning formula. He doesn't apologize for things. He doesn't back down. He's not particularly gracious towards his opponents. But those things have won. And a lot of his core supporters really like that and are energized by it. But I think you're right. Will the Supreme Court work in an opposite way as it did in 2016? So a lot of Republicans, after the by the way, this was the weekend that Billy Bush tape came out. A lot of people said, geez, I don't like that at all. But you know what? He's going to put conservatives on the court and I'll vote for him. And it could be the almost opposite now, because of course, if he gets Barrett on the court, which I think he will, he's got the votes. I think that a lot of people may say on the Democratic side, we got to go out and we got to vote for Biden because we got to stop some of these restrictions that might come from a conservative court.
Great. Two quick additional questions and then we'll closing statement. Someone writes that, Neil, you and President Trump have something in common. You both tested positive for COVID and thankfully Neil recovered. But this person asks if you can share your experience with the virus and how you are feeling now.
I got so much press off the fact that I had COVID-19 because it was after the presidential primary and I had been on TV a lot and things like that. And all of a sudden I put this Facebook posting out and I was very preventative. When I went to the grocery store, I had a face shield, an N95, not the handmade face mask that everybody's wearing these days. I had the N95, I washed my hands. And of course, it's just like the fire detectors in your home. You're not going to come down with it at 1 PM. Your fire detectors don't run out of battery juice and start chirping at 1 PM. It was 1 AM and I was hit by it. And we have a glassed porch where I basically went and I had to be there for 3 weeks. And it was very tough. It was much worse than I ever thought. I have no pre-existing conditions. I don't take medications. And it was very, very rough. And people need to be thinking not only prevention, but what happens when you get it and how do you react? Because my wife and daughter did not get it, which is very interesting. And why is that? We don't know. But a lot of the things like this. So when you're thirsty, you go to your kitchen sink and fill up a bottle of water. And when you have 104 fever and you need water, you got to have water, you need thermometers, all kinds of different things that you need to have ready to go in case you get this virus. But it was very challenging and I think I'm fine now. So hopefully the rest of me is okay as well.
Yeah, it's good to hear, Neil. And again, we're all, thankful that you, fully recovered. Before I ask the last question, I just want to again thank Neil Levesque for his time today. He's very busy. Obviously today, releasing the polls and a lot of media attention later on this afternoon and tomorrow. But again, I just want to thank Neil also for just the tremendous job he does leading the New Hampshire Institute of Politics. And Neil also is a member of the college's leadership team and the incredible job he does and all of us do in supporting Dr. Bavaza and the great work he's done with responding to this unprecedented pandemic that is facing our nation, facing every college and university campus in the country. And then also I want to thank Patrice Russell and Megan LaPointe and the entire alumni relations team for the incredible work that they do, bringing programming like today's webinar with Neil Levesque. And without further ado, Neil, a final question, then closing comments. Someone wrote just today, Larry Sabato's crystal ball moved New Hampshire's first from leans Democrat to likely Democrat. What say you, Neil Levesque?
I think that you have two strong candidates, but Mowers has been sort of closing the gap, and he's a talented politician, and that district does lean Republican. So I think more than the other district. So I think that that's all part of that. I did not know that Larry had moved it up. It's good to know. And just as a close, you know, the country is so divided. You know, I put a picture of me and Harris up on Facebook and I get, you know, hate mail for 3 weeks. The country is so divided. People are very angry about politics right now. And I think they're angry about the fact that we're all cooped up at home and not being able to enjoy each other as we'd like. But the truth is that these people, they believe in our country. They put their name on the ballot because they want to serve. And in my experience here, with dealing with these candidates, dealing with the elected officials, they're very patriotic people who want to do the right thing. They're not evil. They're not going to hurt us. They're trying to do the right thing. So keep that in mind as we go to November and you think about the candidates that you're supporting.
Thank you again, Neil. I hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Thank you.